Choir. Wow. Last year, a year ago, we were in Kansas freezing our tushies off, dreaming of what it might be like to live in Honolulu, Hawaii. And when we looked at your church's website, what we noticed was a couple of things. One was the Messiah. We didn't get to do that? And now this year, it's here, tonight. And so I'm excited. My family is thrilled, and we're so excited to come to Messiah. To have the orchestra and this huge choir sing and get us into this Christmas spirit of perhaps one of the greatest works ever penned of Handel's Messiah. On top of that, there's this trolley ride that we get to go around and look at Christmas lights. And then the Honolulu Boy Choir singing and doing a concert with some guy that apparently is famous that I had never heard of in a couple of weeks on the 20th. And so we have so many opportunities here for you to get involved and be uplifted in the spirit of Christmas. And so please make it a point to come either tonight or to the Honolulu Boy Choir on the 20th or the 100 other things that are happening in our community. In your bulletin is an Aloha Yellow sheet, and I'd invite you to take that home and go deeper this week as you seek to grow closer to God in this Advent season. And so would you pray with me as we begin our sermon time together? O Spirit of God, descend upon us like a dove. And grant us ears that are willing to hear, hearts that are willing to change, and the courage to follow a peaceable path, the path of Jesus our Christ. Amen. This sermon is perhaps one of the hardest sermons I've ever had to try to write. Friday morning is my date morning, as we now call it, because all of our kids are in school. And so Kate and I go out on dates, and as we're driving, the first thing that happens is the Hallelujah chorus erupts, that it's quiet in our car, and that the kids are at school. And when she said, "What are you preaching on this weekend?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, what's the theme?" And I said, "Well, peace." And she goes, "Well, that's easy." And I said, "Is it?" And she said, "Well, is it not?" And I said, "You preach on it." And she said, "No." And I said, the problem with peace is that it's confounding. It's troubling. It's something that is so elusive that we've never seen it actually lived out in our world. Today, 73 years ago, there was a bombing in the harbor 2 miles or 3 miles away, in which the silence of a Sunday morning like today was broken by bombs being dropped. 4 years later, the country that I love and live in responded by dropping atomic bombs and killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. This week, I watched the news, and I'm horrified to see what's happening in our own culture. Ferguson, Missouri, in which none of you have been to, I'm sure, or maybe not even heard of, suddenly becomes a headline. Or New York City, or South Carolina, or ISIS, or the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda. And if I'm honest, I don't know how to preach a sermon about peace, because I don't see it lived anywhere. And not only out there in the world, I get to counsel people and hear the inner turmoil that people have in their lives, and the reality that peace is elusive in our own lives, let alone in our nation. So the season of Advent is the season of waiting and expecting and hoping. And I sit some 2,000 years later and wonder, did the Christ event, this baby coming to earth, make a difference? Because are we any more peaceful than we were back then as people today? I want to believe that the good news of our gospel changes the world, and it changes us one person at a time. But the headlines tell me that what we know is how to war with each other. And so today, as I contemplated, how do we speak about Pearl Harbor Day? How do we speak about peace? How do we speak about the Christ event that changes the world with the reality of what we experience? And so my wife, kindly, as she so often does, said, David, you need to pray more. And let the Spirit move. And you have to remember that just because we're safe doesn't mean that we're at peace. Just because we're safe does not mean we are at peace. And that got my head going. And I started thinking about the ancient world that Jesus was born into. A world that knew peace. And I want to contrast two different pieces today for you. Of the peace of our worldly way and the peace that our scriptures present. So first, our worldly way. This is a peace that often uses symbols, and the symbols often are that of weapons. Jesus was born into the Roman Empire. And in that Roman Empire, they had this peace called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And it sounded great because if you lived in the borders of the Roman Empire, you were at peace. And you didn't have to worry. Why? Because anyone that disrupted the flow of life were killed. And as they were a conquering people and they kept expanding their boundaries, they would go into extended places and go to communities and say, you will either be Romans or you will die. What would you like to do? And guess what most people decided? To become Romans. And for some 200 years, this peace of Rome transcended the ancient world. But it was a peace by force. It was a peace that was militant. It was a peace that was imposed. The Roman Empire kept expanding and expanding and expanding, and to the point that they got so big and so wide and so far that a conquering group came and conquered them. And the Roman Empire fell. And this new group rose, and they ruled for a while with an iron fist, and then they fell. And then a new group came with better weaponry and rose, and they ruled, and they fell. And now it's 2014, and that trend has happened for millennium. In fact, our scriptures tell us since the very first beginnings of humanity, Cain and Abel, the brothers that war against each other. And so if this is the world that we live in, of this Pax Romana, insert a baby into that world named Jesus. Emmanuel, God with us. And suddenly the Christians began to speak about Pax Christi, the Christ peace. And I don't know about you, but I find Jesus' teachings incredibly hard to live and troubling. If someone slaps you on the cheek, don't get revenge. Turn the other one also. Don't hate your enemies. Love them. He teaches us that there's a different way that we're called to be, and it's incredibly hard. Yesterday, as I was contemplating and praying through the sermon, love never faileth kept going through my mind. December 7th, 1941, people not undifferent than ourselves gathered in fear in this very sanctuary. And they had a question, why God, why? And they sat underneath of that cross and that motto, and they spoke about a hope that we have because of the Christ event. And I'm always reminded about this Christ event that he starts out as an innocent child and ultimately is crucified by the ways of our world. Could Jesus have fought back? Yes. But the first words from the cross as he's hanging there isn't words of condemnation, It is quite simply, Father, forgive them, for they do not understand what they are doing. Father, forgive them, for they do not understand what they are doing. Not too long ago, Martin Luther King Jr. said this: "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Or Gandhi. Gandhi once said, "An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind." An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind. I don't know about where you are in life, but I'm tired and really, really tired of the violence. I'm tired of people saying that in the name of Christ we conquer. That the example that we have given 2,000 years has not produced more peace in our world, but instead the 20th century was the bloodiest century the world has ever known. What does it mean for us, those of us that call ourselves people of the way? Well, maybe it's time that we embrace the way of God. It's a way in which a dove descends upon Jesus and announces that this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. In Christianity, one of the symbols and signs that we've used of the Holy Spirit is the dove. How many of you have seen doves be violent? Doves are a symbol of peace, of simplicity. And there's a reason why our ancestors of faith used it to describe what we are called to be about. As we're called into a new paradigm in which the ways of the world, we say it doesn't work anymore. It hasn't, it won't, and it never will. History proves it over and over again, and maybe it's time for us to actually try something new. And as I think about that, I think, well, what do you do with all those that do such evil things in this world? What do you do about people that hurt people? And then I have to look in the mirror and realize that I'm one of them. Because you see, none of us are as good as we think we are, and none of us are as bad as we think we are. All of us have the capacity within us to be blessings to this world, but let's be honest, all of us have done some things that we regret. Those words that we have spoken, those actions we have taken. And so if we can first be honest and look in the mirror at ourselves and say, what is it inside of me that needs to change first before I go pointing fingers at the rest of the world? Maybe that's the place that God's peace starts working, is in us. And we stop the warring inside of ourselves and around us. And when someone comes and slaps us, we turn our cheek. Whether that's a hand that slaps us or words that slap us. And we find a better way. Thomas A. Kempis, great theologian, said this: "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." Or as Jesus said, "Why do you keep looking at the plank in that person's, or the speck in that person's eye, when you have this gigantic plank coming out of your own? Deal with your own stuff first, and then worry about everyone else." And what I've found in my 37 and almost 38 years of life is I've yet to be able to deal with other people's planks, because I'm still working on my own. Peace. It should be this warm and fuzzy topic that we talk about. But by golly, it's elusive. It's missing. It's absent. And the way of peace of our world is oftentimes a forced peace. And the force is lives that's left. Children that will never go home. spouses that can never forget those words, children that have tapes that play about how they're not good enough or smart enough or worthy enough of love. You see, peace isn't just a worldwide issue. It's an us issue. 1955, a young man decided that it was time for us to do something different. And he created a four-sided pole called a peace pole, and he planted it at his house. On the side of the pole, in 4 different languages, it reads, "May peace prevail on earth." It's called a peace pole. You may have seen them around town. I'm sure some churches and other communities have them. One church I served put one in. They made a beautiful garden, and it was called the Garden of Peace. And in that garden, in the middle, was a large pole about 10 feet tall that came out of that garden. And in 4 different languages, it said, "May there be peace on earth." You see, this young guy was tired of the warring and the madness. He was living in the aftermath of the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he decided that warring wasn't the answer, and instead we needed to be a people of peace. And so he planted a pole, and now the Peace Project has spread worldwide. And people all over the world plant these poles as a statement that we are a people about peace. Maybe it's time Central Union plants a new pole. That we say, as long as we follow the way of Jesus Christ, we follow the way of peace. And we live by this call to love our enemies, to bless those that curse us, and to trust God to be God and be at work. For the peace of God that rules the heavens has already come down to us in the form of the Spirit. Maybe this Advent season in which we wait and we wonder and we hope, maybe this year we can be conduits of that peace and let it descend on us and rest. And let us deal with our stuff, the warring inside, so that we can be a people of peace outside. Maybe that's why the Christ event happened. Maybe that's why you and I are invited into it. Is that we are called to be participants in peace. May we lay our weapons to the side, as the prophets foretold, that they would turn their weapons into plowshares and be a people of peace. May that be our hope today and in the season of Advent. Amen.